Quick disclaimer, I'm posting this information as a learning tutorial only. It's meant to demonstrate that you need to be careful about what you're clicking on Facebook, but it shows how easily someone could obtain semi-sensitive information about you, such as your IP address or your host name, just by clicking on a link that someone posted on Facebook. So with that being said, today we're going to look at obtaining user information from malicious or potentially malicious Facebook links, and exploiting the Facebook crawler to have those links appear as safe links when you post them to Facebook. So when you post something to Facebook, Facebook has a crawler that actually goes out and retrieves information from that website. So when you say post a link to Google, Facebook crawls that website and it obtains information such as the page title, gets a little thumbnail, and a description of the page that it posts underneath of your status update. And what's interesting, and it's what's expected behavior, but it's interesting that Facebook follows redirects. So if you have something and you paste it into Bitly or another URL shortener service, Facebook will actually follow those redirects until it reaches the final destination and retrieve the information from that page. So that's helpful because if somebody posts a shortened link on Facebook, you can actually you can get to the end page without constantly seeing Bitly information. But it can also be exploited by people with malicious intent, and that's what we're going to look at a little bit today. If somebody posts a link on Facebook that goes through another web service, possibly a web service that they own, which we're going to show here in a second, they can first, before redirecting the user to the final page, obtain a bunch of information about that user, such as their IP address, their user agent, their referring URL, and their host name. So on the screen here I have some PHP code that I wrote quickly, and what it does is it connects to a MySQL database, it obtains the information from the user, it pastes it into that MySQL database, and then it redirects the user to a new page. So you can see here I have ID, time, IP, user agent, referrer, and host name. This is the information we're going to be obtaining from the user. Then we're going to be passing it off, that user off to a new URL. So you can see here all the code that goes behind it, and we'll come back to this in a second. I just want to go to the website that I made here real quickly. This is basically a tracking page. Essentially, it's a URL shortening, or rather redirection service, and it allows you to redirect users to pages. But before it redirects the user, quickly, without that user even noticing it, it grabs a ton of information about them. So say we go to here and we enter google.com. What we're telling this service to do is to generate a URL, a unique URL, for this particular service, and going to that particular URL. So here we see that it gives a link, and that's the link that we want to give to the person that we want to find information about. But first, just to show even more, we're going to paste this link into Bitly. And so I'm going to shorten this URL even more, and then I'm going to return to Facebook. I'm going to update my status, and I'm going to paste this in here. And you can see by this little bar here that Facebook actually goes out and it retrieves the information about the link. So I'm going to post this, and I'm going to return here to the web service that I created. Now, this web service gives us an access code. This is a unique code that allows us to obtain statistics about people that clicked on the link. So I'm going to go to Facebook here, and I'm going to click on my link. And you can see that, through a number of redirects, the user doesn't even notice, they eventually wind up getting to Google. So here's Google, it loads. Now, I paste my URL tracking code that I received into here, and I click Track URL. Now what this does is it looks up all of the information that I just received from that user. They were redirected to Google, but in reality the page that they were redirected through, this PHP page that we just looked at here, was obtaining all of their information and writing it to a database. You can see here the Bitly bot across the page, the Facebook's crawler across the page, and then finally here we see this IP address, which is my IP address. I'm using Tor, so it's just a randomized IP at the moment. But you can see here that I have a URL, a user agent string that shows the operating system that I'm using and the web browser that I'm using as well. We also have my host name, which is what received information about the NS lookup. So this is a ton of information that can be passed through links on Facebook, and you can see on Facebook the link looks just like any other link to Google. That's really interesting because people need to be careful about this. They can click any link without knowing it, and they're actually giving up tons of information about themselves, their location, etc., etc. So just be careful. One way that you can protect against this is if you scroll over the link, down at the bottom you'll see a bit.ly link. Basically that means that it's going through a URL redirection service. Now, there's no way of knowing where it eventually goes, but you should be able to trust certain people that you know on Facebook. If you're clicking on a link on a public fan page or something like that, you need to be more careful. So that's about it for this. As I said, this is a web service that I generated. You can access it by going to Blaze, that's blaze.com/iplog. And that'll take you to the homepage where you can generate your own URL redirected link as well as a tracking code. This is the technical detail behind it here in this PHP code, but essentially all you need to know is that it grabs the user information, redirects them to a certain page, and then stores that information about them for somebody else that generated the URL redirection link to come back and find out about them. So thanks for watching, and as always, be careful about what you click on.